Thank you, Andrew, for that introduction. And I know it's after lunch, and you've already had a very heavy morning. So I will try and make this as dynamic and short as possible in order for us really to get into discussion, which I find so useful with these types of forums. And thanks again to ODI for hosting this. Now, if we are really talking about new approaches, and as Andrew said, USAID is really embarking on a very new approach to achieving development results. I think one of the important things to look at is, where we've been. So just very quickly, for those of you who have not studied USAID over the last 51 years since our inception, the 60s and 70s was very focused on project funding. USAID, as you know, was born out of President Kennedy's vision of what we should be doing with development around the globe. And it grew as, almost a renaissance with lots of individuals within the organizations implementing the projects. So a very large organization, very much focused on large projects in countries such as, obviously, Korea, where we had thousands of people working for USAID, and we look at where Korea is today, South Korea, obviously, or in countries such as Taiwan or Chile. So large projects, large numbers of people working within the ministries, really doing the hands-on development. And then that shifted in the 80s and the early 90s to doing what we call non-project assistance, very much cash transfers, working again with ministries on policy reform, but transferring the funds, conditioning the funds in order to achieve results, while we still also had project funding. By the mid-90s to really 2008, we had a significant shift within USAID where it became very much project funded, but a dependence upon contractors and non-governmental organizations, private contractors, due to staff cuts. Our foreign service was dramatically cut in 1995, therefore relying much more upon others outside of USAID, outside of the government, and an increased aid budget, where all of a sudden we were engaged, as you know, in places such as Iraq and Afghanistan and Pakistan and other places where our aid budget significantly increased and our staffing went down. So that gives you a very quick history of where we've been and now where we're going. Now, simultaneously, I just wanted to focus on, the international movement, because obviously during this period, and ODI, collaborating with ODI, very helpful to have some data on this, looking at that 50% of the donor assistance was not aligned, obviously, with the host country priorities. That was the impetus for Paris. And if we look at then the Paris agenda, emphasizing the importance of host country government systems, really ownership, and as we move from Paris to Accra to Busan, really the focus being on country ownership. And Busan in particular, if we look back a year ago, how we were able as a community to engage those emerging donors, whether it was India or Brazil or South Africa, the Chinese, and how critical, obviously, it is in order to achieve real development. So not only emerging donors, but the private sector, the important role that the private sector, civil society, and others are playing. So you have this international movement going on in the past decade, and you have USAID in a situation where we're really evaluating where do we want to go in this new international arena. And when President Obama came in 2008, one of the things that he made very clear is that development is a priority. He obviously had been engaged in this really from the time of his birth, with the role that his mother had played in development, and he grew up with a philosophy that the importance of international development in order to really achieve our global goals and to be part of the global community. So one of the first things he did when he came in is he instructed his national security staff to undertake what we call a presidential study directive. And it was a year-long study that took place for really the entire year of 2008 into 9. And looking at how we internally within the U.S. government actually conduct development. And one of the things that was revealed in that study, which every week all of the different ministries, if you will, in our case, departments, came together to look at different development challenges. And you had 28 different entities within the US government coming together who were engaged in development. Well, one of the first things that obviously was relevant was that there were so many actors just within the US government engaged in development. And while USAID is the primary development entity for delivering assistance, there were a lot of others who were engaged. And so really from that study, after 1 year, the Presidential Policy Directive being issued in September 2010, and really looking at what works and what doesn't. So as you know from that global development policy, one of the primary principles of the policy is host country ownership. The importance of, again, being aligned with governments, about looking at the political will, about the ownership within that country, and not just talking about governments. I think this was another unique aspect of the PPD is, and I received a lot of questions right after the PPD was issued of whether or not we're only talking about host country ownership and alignment based upon government to government. The answer is no. It's looking at civil society. It's looking at the role of private sector. You've seen a lot from us recently in the last year. Our administrator just gave a speech in July on open source development. There are so many different actors in the development space. It is very different, as we were talking yesterday. I joined the session with Homie and some others, that there are so many different actors. How do we actually collaborate, and how do we work in order to achieve greater development? Second element about it being evidence-based decision making, that we really have the evidence and the data, as again I think this conference has emphasized, in order for us to make better decisions about where we invest. And again, partnering with ODI, and as we have in with other institutes, to really get at what works, what doesn't, why, and how. So a major shift. The focus very much on sustainability and the use of country systems. And as I just mentioned, not just government systems. And then finally, what has worked? We have a lot of experience, a lot of data working through host country systems in health system strengthening or value chain delivery, and really understanding how we've made progress globally in these areas. So what does this mean for USAID? We issued then, after the PPD was issued in September 2010, in September 2011, we issued our policy framework, which really is USAID's strategy for moving forward over the next 5 years, with very clear targeted targets and results that we aspire to achieve. And some of the key principles are partnering, again, partnering not just with governments, but partnering globally. The importance of leveraging, how do we particularly leverage those who are engaged in the development space, and sustainability. We've all talked about sustainability for years, but what are some of the tools to actually help us achieve sustainability? But it's one thing to have principles, it's another thing to actually have targets. So one of the things that our administrator insisted that we commit to as an agency is a major reform in which in the past, we had not, as you saw in our history, we had not worked through country systems. In 2011, as a matter of fact, only 11% of our assistance was provided to local entities, and most of that was to local organizations, not government to government. Now we have a target by 2015 of delivering aid directly to local entities, both public and private, by 2015. So that's a target that we're driving towards, again, partnering with our missions. We are located in 80 different countries. We are a very decentralized organization, so while as corporate headquarters can be working on these global goals, the most important thing as our agency is really then at the local level with our missions, so that they can actually work to achieve these goals. And again, it's a whole of society approach. It's really local localizing aid, if you will. How do we actually achieve the best development results as we move forward? So it's an enormous reform effort that we're undertaking in our assistance delivery. So some of the challenges, and I just wanted to highlight this, particularly for discussion, and those of you who have lived in the U.S. or have spent time over across the pond understand that there are some real challenges here. I mean, the first is really a change of mindset, moving from one that was very results-based focus, important to be very focused on delivering the results, but really what we're talking about is a systems approach, one where we're actually focusing on developing the systems of a host country, whether that is through the government or through local entities. And your results are going to be slower. So that's the second challenge, right? The timeline is a lot longer. And our Congress is very insistent on delivering results very quickly, being able to show the data and the numbers within a very short time frame. But if you're building actually host country systems in order to achieve sustainability, in order for us to work ourselves out of a job, that takes a lot longer. Some real challenges there. Third, there's really no common definition of country system. Most people think about building host country systems or country system strengthening as just government to government. And as I tried to emphasize earlier, that we in the Obama administration really have taken a much broader look at this, that really there are so many different development actors, and we need to engage all of them in order to really strengthen the systems of that country in order to achieve better development. Fourth, there's lack of evidence that the new development model is more effective. And this is where, partnering with ODI, we're really pleased to have them going out to some of our countries, whether it's Liberia or Uganda or Guatemala, and really looking at the evidence base and how are we doing, and being able to understand at a much deeper level and a much less superficial level that unfortunately we all rely too much upon anecdote and not really upon the evidence that is necessary. Fifth, governance and transparency is absolutely fundamental. We talk about this as using their pipes. And if you use their pipes, if you use their systems, you will actually achieve better development. But that requires governance. That requires transparency. And again, not just with the government, but with local organizations who are willing to put onto public websites and using different systems to really transparently show how they've used external resources to achieve results. Six, the risks that are involved with the diversion of funds. And this is something that we're really challenged with, obviously, within the U.S. government, given its U.S. taxpayer dollars. We're all facing very austere times right now. And there's greater accountability, as there should be. And so that does require risks. And whether you're working through government systems, you're working through local organizations, or you're working through international organizations, one of the things we're challenging ourselves to find is that the risks are actually the same, or we understand, most importantly, we understand the risks that we're taking and the evidence as we move forward in working through those systems. And then finally, my last slide, just on the opportunities. We obviously would not have embarked upon this major reform effort within USAID if we did not believe it was the right thing to do. We all recognize, and as you have been discussing in this conference, that there are a wide range of actors engaged in development. Everyone from your student in the dorm who's working in a development lab to somebody who's, a blogger working on issues to obviously more traditional donors. And how do we engage everyone and harness that energy in order to achieve greater development? Second, there's an increased demand for data and transparency. I mean, if you really look back on Paris and Accra, I mean, transparency was not at the level that it is today. And so with that energy, that renewed energy really for data, and not just data from traditional sources, but data from all sources. And as we talk about big data and how do you use big data in order to leverage better results, and the need for transparency, that's a huge opportunity. And that enables us, I think, to move in a different direction. Third, the decreased transaction costs. Clearly, there are high transaction costs when you have a multitude of donors engaged in one country. My last posting, I'm a foreign service officer, my last posting was in Colombia, and we worked very hard, and I know you heard from our Colombian counterpart this morning, who unfortunately I missed, but we've worked very, very hard in order to reduce the transaction costs, to really bring the donor community together with the government to align to achieve results. And that does require leadership, which is what we saw in the Colombian government, to really play that leadership role. But we have to decrease the transaction costs. And then finally, as I said, we have an opportunity now, I think, partnering with ODI and others as we're moving forward to really gather the experience and the evidence in order to further our objectives in this area. And just to close, one of the things that we are doing, and happy to share with others the results of this, is an experience summit back in Washington on the 27th and 28th of November, really looking at how we have localized aid, what our experience is with country systems strengthening, and how do we really move to achieve the goals and the aspirational targets that we set out for us. So I'll end there. Thank you.